Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Chasing Squirrels podcast. On this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Debbie Donsky. Debbie, I got to know first from following some of her Twitter posts within my professional learning network. She is a part of my board, and I always make it kind of a center spot in my pursuit of learning on Twitter to try and get connected with some of the instructors that are in my board but that I don't regularly have contact with. The board that I work in is quite large, so, being able to connect in real life with all of my learning network would be impossible without using something like Twitter. I also got to know her from reading her posts on her blog, and I was struck by, as best as I can describe it, the honesty in her writing, where I felt like she was finding a real sweet spot between looking at life and looking at education and looking at the hopeful changes that could be made in education if we just stay with the conversation long enough. And in her reaching out with her words, I felt a certain trust coming from her that not only was there expectation to engage in conversation based on her posts, but also that she would sort of wait there for you until you kind of got it. The conversation tonight with Debbie really ranges from her origin story to looking at some of her mentors that helped her along in her career. And throughout the conversation, I was brought back to that exact same point that I realized in reading her blogs and looking at her tweets, that she's the real deal. And when I get to spend time with someone that can help me to understand some of the places that I have yet to even encounter, it feels like I'm on a bit of an adventure. I really do believe you're going to enjoy this conversation, and thank you for spending time with me. All right, and thank you for listening to Chasing Squirrels. I am very happy to speak today with Debbie Donsky. Debbie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Before we get into the deep, could you throw down just a little bit about what you're doing in education, what you're connected with in education? That'd be fantastic.
Sure. Currently, I'm working in the curriculum department in the York Region Board, and I have two main portfolios, which include the Learning Design and Development team, which is really cool and something that I think most educators don't have the opportunity to do, which is working with multimedia folks. So there are people on my team who are graphic designers, web designers, multimedia experts, videographers, animation, and we produce all of the learning materials for staff in our board. We also work with the communications department, developing tools for communication out of the board. And it's a really cool creative department that I get to work with. And there's me and one other teacher as well, who is an instructional design lead. So that's really cool. And then the other portfolio is the arts, which is also a creative department. So I'm very happy with my role. And aside from that, I do a lot of work in terms of supporting the board improvement plans, school improvement plans, and I have become more active lately in terms of the equity department in our board as well. Outside of the board, I guess I've been in education for almost 25 years formally, and I work for the Ontario Principals Council, teaching courses, writing courses, and leading the PQP course in our board as well.
That's phenomenal. I think that is exactly why I love to ask the guests to frame a little bit of their origin story. I had my finger on one small piece of that and built my approach, built all my curiosities around a very small piece. And now I find that my sketch note in front of me is only going to scratch the surface. So this is maybe part one of our conversation. No commitment yet, but that's a phenomenal portfolio. One of the things I like to ask on the front end is a little bit of the origin story. You gave me a taste of it, but let's say before the portfolios that you listed, how did education find you, or did you find it, as far as working in education?
Well, it's funny. I have this neighbor that I grew up next to as a child, and apparently they moved in when I was 4 years old. And I went up to her as a 4-year-old and said, "Hi, my name's Debbie Donsky. When I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher, get married, and be a mummy." So for me, being a teacher was something I always knew. It was my path. It was not an easy path to get there, but I never strayed from it, even though it was very hard. It took me 3 years to get into the Faculty of Ed. It took me 3 years to get a permanent job, which, given the current circumstances, doesn't seem like a long time, but back then it was a long time. And in terms of administration, because I'm a principal as well, I did not go into education thinking I'm going to be a principal. I'm always driven by work with kids. So the role I have now is challenging in that way, because I'm not having a direct impact on kids. It's more about indirect and influence. I have, with the sketch notes that I do, I've found opportunity to be invited to schools to work with kids occasionally, and that's the highlight for me. But yeah, it's always been something that I knew I was to do. So I actually taught in the former North York Board and the TDSB, worked at the ministry for a couple of years, and then came to York Region as a vice principal, and that was about 13 years ago.
I love the connections. You're making connections for me, but I love the connection between doing access to creative resources and doing working with individuals that have high impact within the school board. So the team that you listed and the resources that you're producing, and at the same time keeping in the perspective the connection with the kids. And I have spoken with other individuals that are sort of moving through their career path, and one of the challenges that they've identified, as far as, let's say, working for curriculum or working for ministry, or even moving through the administrative path to become a principal, is their concern, I guess, about losing connection to the kids. And I love to hear those conversations, because sometimes that conversation is framed around that it's easy somehow to move into those different leadership positions and lose track of the students. I hear for you that it's very important. With the sketch notes, I think that's a great, I guess, tether, or sort of like a bungee to sort of bring you back to the classroom. What else is important about making that connection for you with the students? What is it that you see as the energy, as in, you bring the sketch notes? What are you still gaining from having that direct connection with the kids?
Well, first, let me just clarify that, I know a lot of people who really care about kids, and for sure, Jen and Royan, who I work with, are two of those people who have left the classroom but have not left the connection with kids. The woman who convinced me to become a principal, she was my principal in my second last school that I worked in the Toronto board. And she said to me, who you are as a teacher is who you are as a principal. And it was something that really stuck with me. And I never lost connection to kids as a school administrator. So what ended up happening was I would be working with the children who had the most struggle, who had the most need. Just yesterday, I went out with a couple of teachers from my last school for breakfast, and we were talking about one of the kids who we had worked with, and that afternoon I ran into his mother, and I live in Toronto and they live in Unionville, and so the fact that I would run into her on the day that I mentioned her son, and this is a boy who struggled so much in school, and he's finishing second year with high 90s, and he's so successful, so I don't lose connection. When it's important, like after the fact, there are still kids who reach out to me, who are finishing high school, and they were my students in elementary school. I even have connection to kids who I taught 30 years ago or 25 years ago. They're in their 30s. So I think that you make the connections you want to have. In terms of the sketch notes, I went to one school in our board, and the teacher, Jeff Ruggiero, you should interview him. He's awesome. He actually, it's Ruggiero, I think is how you say it.
Is he a teacher or librarian?
Yes.
I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah.
I like the stuff he's putting up. Yeah, for sure. That could be a conversation.
Yeah, really cool guy. So he invited me out and set up a session in each of the 3 blocks. Elementary schools in our board have 300-minute blocks typically. And I worked with different groups of kids from grades 3 to 8. And it was amazing because the first session was all the kids who were in the student support center, and the teacher was just blown away. She said, some of these kids never put pen to paper, and I cannot believe what they're producing. And then there was another group of kids, and a couple of the girls were like, are you coming every Friday? So like in this short span of 100 minutes, you make connection. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to do that, for me anyway, and it just fills me up. It's exactly what you said. It gives me an energy that I cannot get just working with adults. But I do also find my kids are 13 and 16, and sometimes I'll be out with my kids and I'll just look at kids, or I'll talk to kids, and my daughter Rachel's like, Mom, you're bordering on creepy. Because I crave being around children. Mm-hmm. And when I have limited access to children other than my own, it's challenging for me.
Wow. You've a whole bunch of different ways I want to go. I'm going to stick just for a second with a bit of your origin story. Mm-hmm. The people that have helped you to become the educator that you are. And I like going to this place, especially like Debbie. I'm going to tell you, I'll throw I got to give you the kudos compliment. I don't even know how to frame it. The pieces that you write, and the connections and the honesty that you write with. I have no. It's apparent to me, reading it at a distance, how you reach out. It's just flat out. And I'm going to get to some of your pieces in a bit, if you'll let me. But it's no wonder to me that you exist in a space of connectivity with current and former students. I don't think you can process and share in the way that you do in your writing pieces without having that ability to connect authentically. And whether it's, you kind of mentioned you do it easily, there's also the element of learning the tools of that as well, the communication tools, and learning to be the educator. And I love the fact you threw down that at 4 years old you're going to be a teacher, like it was hardwired into your DNA. Yeah. And then the challenge of becoming the teacher sets in. So you have the idea, and then you sort of get the skill set on top of it. I'm curious about people in your life, whether they were professors or educators, that modeled any of that connectivity for you. So I'm not trying to pull away any of your skill set, but is there anyone that comes to mind when you think back, like, yeah, that person rocked me? Yeah.
I mean, wow. Well, I guess the first one would be, I had a teacher in grade 2 named Miss Taylor, who saw me. I was always a chubby kid, and I think sometimes people don't connect with chubby kids the same way they do kids who would be traditionally beautiful. And she connected with me, and I remember show and tell that I was the one kid who never brought anything in. I would just tell stories. I would tell them about the dreams I had the night before. And she saw me, and I would say after that, my grade 4 teacher, he was just hilarious. His name was Mr. Trichuk. And I had just wonderful teachers through my schooling. I had one teacher, everyone would joke, in grade 9, who was my English teacher, Mr. Armstrong, who would have been the first gay man I fell in love with. And he just saw a sparkle in me that I always had trouble seeing it in myself. And my teachers helped me to see it. And I remember I went to a junior high school in Toronto, and they had my grade 9 graduation dance. Almost every dance was dedicated to me and Mr. Armstrong. There's so many pictures of me dancing with him. And And yeah, so he had a huge impact on me. And then in high school, I mean, I had some really good teachers, but I wouldn't say anyone that had that kind of profound impact. In university, my supervisor for my doctoral program was Professor Tara Goldstein, and she still works at Boise. And she was someone who stood out to me as someone who not only knew her content but knew the craft. She made an effort to connect part-time students. It's a really isolating experience when you're working at that level and you're not a full-time student, mostly because everyone that you started with finishes years before you. And she is a phenomenal teacher, and I'm still in touch with her. And then in terms of my career, I mean, oh my goodness, Lillian Blakey, she's a former consultant for the North York Board. She was an arts consultant, but was instrumental in leading me to understand how you integrate equity into everything you do. She's retired now, but oh my goodness, the principal I mentioned who told me to become a principal is Mira Hatiangadi. And she was also a leader in equity in the North York Board. And working with her changed the trajectory of my career completely. And she unfortunately passed 2 years ago, far too young. I mean, there were so many people. I would also say I worked at the ministry for a couple of years, and my senior manager there was Ron St. Louis, and he also passed the same year as Mira. It was not a good year for me. And I would say those three people for me within my career. But then within our board, and I've heard these names mentioned, Ruth Lambert was my first superintendent, and she's retired, but oh my goodness, I still call her in moments of need. Denise Belchez was my coach when I became a new principal, and she supported my career totally. Sharon List, also retired superintendent, was incredibly supportive. Dan Wu was my superintendent as well. Kathy Witherow and I, we're trying to write an article now together. She's a great mentor. And then Matt Champion is a retired principal. He was my first principal as a vice principal. There's so many people. I could just keep going on and on. But right now I would say Jen and Royan in the department teach me so much. And my very good friend Nada Aude, who is one of the coordinators in the curriculum department too, and then Janine Franklin, who is also a coordinator. So it's mostly, I would say, the teachers that I connect with in the department, and I think that's because so much of what the administrator role in curriculum is it's very administrative, not particularly creative, and I'm drawn, and it's not that they aren't creative people, it's just their roles are so administrative. And I'm drawn to the creativity that our coordinators and consultants bring to the department.
I got to say, you have a phenomenal memory. A phenomenal memory. You track back to grade 2.
Yeah.
I as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, what were my teachers' names in grade 2? And I have images.
Yeah.
I think I know where I was. I'm not sure if I can remember names.
I could tell you, everyone from grade 1 up, I could tell you who I had as teachers. And there were way more than I listed, but those are the ones I would say that had the most profound impact on me.
I love what you said about your teacher seeing you. And you identified the sparkle, but I want to focus just for a second on the being seen, because that strikes me as the turning point. What they see is the conversation after that, but the turning point is being seen. If I sort of run the tape forward to now, how do you take that tool and bring it back to your sort of professional relationships now, or your, with the students? Let's say that concept of being seen is so powerful. How do you honor that in your sort of day-to-day now?
Well, I mean, I could talk about in schools probably in a more effective way.
Okay.
But, as a school principal, every morning, every night, I'm in the driveway greeting people, hello, saying goodbye. I go out at recess and I look for the kids who are alone. And at my last school, we had this little team of kids who were sort of just a little bit on the outside, and they would come walk around with me. And we would find kids who were alone, and sometimes they want to be alone, but sometimes they don't. And so we had this funny group of kids who were from, I would say, grade 1 to grade 8, who would just hang out at recess and look for kids who needed support and friendship. It wasn't anything formal, it was very organic. I would also say that, so there's the actual physical seeing of someone who's maybe alone, but I think it's also the idea that when people are in struggle, that you have to see beyond it. So, I talk about the parent who comes into the office and is screaming at you. And so many administrators and teachers, and I certainly did this as a teacher and administrator when I was new to it, you take it personally. And it's hard not to when they're pointing their finger at you and saying, you did this to my child. But recognizing in that and seeing the pain that the parent has, and perhaps a history of trauma in schooling, and lack of trust, and peeling all of that back and seeing the fact that they're there because they love their child, and nothing is more important to them than caring for their child and advocating for their child. I wrote actually a blog about it, about shaming helicopter parents, and I actually can't stand that terminology because for the parents who need to be there to advocate because the school's not doing a good enough job, we should not be calling them helicopter parents. And for the parents who are what we would typically call helicopter parents, we need to unpack that a little bit. Either way, the term shames parents and loses connection to the school, and ultimately the child suffers. And I would also say with my staff that, I think that some principals go into schools and they want to be punitive. They see a teacher who's struggling and they want to catch them in something. And I think it was Becky Green, who's also an incredible leader in our system. She was doing this training years ago, walkthrough training, and said that the walkthrough training is about a treasure hunt and not a witch hunt. And I look at teachers in the same way, that when I do their evaluations, when I work with them in their classrooms, where are the treasures? So I don't mean this in a condescending way, but you have to know who your class is. And I need to teach the teachers as if they were my children in my classroom. And I mean that in the most respectful way, that we have empathy for children, but not always for adults. And we need to find that. And I think that's all of that idea of being seen, seeing people for their essence instead of their actions. And when people are seen in that way, their actions shift.
You have a wonderful, you mentioned your writing, your blog, and I have one chunk that I grabbed, standing with the child. Now it's completely decontextualized. It just jumped out at me. And just below it, I scribbled in their space, in their moment, in their emotion. And that makes entire sense to me as I listen to your philosophy of the educator. That's at the heart of it. Whether your current portfolio is principal or, or in class or parent, I'm getting this from you, that standing with the child is part of the core. Absolutely part of the core. Can I shift over to your writing just a little bit?
Sure.
I struggle in my posts sometimes because I find that when I see something in education that piques my interest, I shift immediately to my family experiences. And sometimes it causes me to lose a little bit sight of what the thing was in education that I was thinking about in the first place. You start going down memory lane. And it's funny because I did not, until I started blogging about being a teacher and a daddy and, a husband, so to speak, I didn't consider myself nostalgic. I actually am the guy that, I can I don't revisit the photos. I don't sort of pull out the old pieces from my first dates or the movie tickets or the concert stubs. But all of a sudden, I found a space where I really enjoyed the nostalgia. And when I started to read your pieces, I felt as if you do too. Mm-hmm. And that inclusion of whole self it strikes me that it might be very important to you. I don't want to impose, but this is my observation of reading your pieces. From members of your family to educational observations to interactions with the community to some really, really just like heart connecting moments that you write about. And digital dualism is that thing that's kind of creeping up in my mind about connecting the dots between what we post and who we are and making sure that there's continuity there. Are you aware of the power of your writing when you're doing that? Like, are you in?
I could tell you there are times when I'm writing, and as I said, my daughter's bedroom's on the main floor, and my desk is right beside her bedroom. She'll be in her room doing work, and I'll be sobbing at my desk as I write. There are times when, like, I wrote one about my grandmother recently, and I was just, it wasn't just as I wrote it, it was as I read it. It takes me about 5 reads before the tears stop when I write. And it's funny because people, I don't know what you're going to read back to me, but sometimes when people read back or quote me, when they post or read back to me, I'm like, did I write that? So honestly, I go to another space and it comes straight from the heart and soul. And it's not very cognitive. I don't always remember what I've written.
Someone said to me, it might have been, I do remember a teacher, Miss Collins, grade 10 drama teacher. And the thing that she drilled in, I think I remember her because she was Miss Collins and then she was Miss Glass.
Yeah.
And then I think she was Miss Smith. I don't remember the story. It would be fascinating to go back and try and find that one. Yeah, but she had 3 last names. And she had said she always recommended write from the heart. Mm-hmm. She said, first draft, write from the heart. Get it out in its writhing, sort of scary, angry, whatever version hits the page, get it out. Because for her position on writing is that you can only get to the refinement of it once you get the raw ore out. Mm-hmm. And I think I completely understand where you're coming from. To exist in that space, though, can be pretty daunting. It can be overwhelming. And if you say 5 reads before the tears stop, mm-hmm. it comes out in your writing. It's there that there isn't pretense here. This is a direct feed.
Yeah.
I'm not going to throw down specific quotes only because there can be that element of surprise, and I feel a little bit better about not grabbing too many quotes because I don't want to I don't want to cause tears. I don't want to. I want to stay on the little bit of the lighter side. But there is one thing that I'll throw down, and it struck me as part. You get to know, getting to know teachers and your colleagues, and you get a little bit of a flavor of what their kind of lens is, and what their thing is, and what they're sort of kind of fighting for on behalf of the students, mm-hmm. and. Part of one of your pieces was talking about the casual, humorous defense mechanism that some children were thrown down of being, quote unquote, I'm okay. And it struck me as a really powerful reflection because I, like you have said, strive to make those authentic connections where a response like I'm okay is good, but it doesn't cut it. Like I want to get behind that. I want to be there with the student around that. And back to that standing with the child quote that I grabbed from your thing, being in their space, being in their moment, and being able to fully appreciate their emotional state. Mm-hmm. And just below the I'm okay, I put, pretense, ? Defense, ? And offense, ? When a child says to you, it could be a colleague too, but when a child or a student says, I'm okay, where does that send you in your thinking, especially if you're working to make that real connection?
Well, it's funny. My daughter said to me the other day, you know, Mommy, whenever you ask me if I'm okay, and I say yes, you then look at me, and she shows me this look where I sort of look out of the corner of my eye and squint a little bit.
Yep. Yep.
Like, are you sure you're okay? So I don't always accept a first response as a final response, because I think that in that idea of being seen, I can see it. This child I mentioned earlier, I ran into his mom. He was a child who had Asperger's, among other things, and you know, we talked about when he was about to go into anxiety, what it looked like, and he had a team that we worked with that were outside of the school board, and one of the people was this amazing occupational therapist. And so we sat with the team that supported him, and we talked about what we see when this boy starts to move into that phase. And the people that worked with him every single day listed a couple of things, and then I kept going. And I said, you know, I see his skin pallor change. I see bags develop under his eyes. I see the color of his eyes change. I see his movements change, how he holds himself changes. You know, like I see things that I think I realize as I get older that not everybody else sees. So it's hard for me to even describe. When that woman asked me to specifically name it, she said, oh my goodness, you should have been an occupational therapist. I'm still not 100% sure what they do, though I've worked with them for many years. But I think it's just this ability to observe in really deep detail. So I can see when someone's not holding themselves right, you know, or, you know, just subtleties around body language. You know, they say that, I think they say that something like 20% of our communication is verbal, but that then the nonverbal and the paraverbal, so the tone and then the body, is 80% of communication. And, you know, I think also working in communities where languages were spoken at home were predominantly not English, I've learned to communicate with people without verbal language. And people that I'm with, I remember once a couple of students were in the office and they were speaking Tamil, and I responded back, and they're like, how did you just understand what we said? And I have no idea how. I said, are you guys talking about this? And, you know, I think there's the odd English word that gets thrown in, but then you read how people are talking and you know. So I think that it's that I don't pry, but I want them to know I'm there, and whatever they have to say is fine. And being in that non-judgmental space, and then developing a reputation for that, I would say. Like, because I've had people in the department say, you know, someone told me that you were a safe person to talk to. And they will just come in my office and close the door. And I am, because I think, going back to the question you asked, that as a child I craved this. Not in a, like, you know, I mean, I'm a middle child, and I actually have a talk that I'm developing about this, but, you know, it is in that way, but it was also that I felt that I had this internal world that people on the outside couldn't see, and that I didn't know how to let it out. And so when somebody allowed me to, they loved me more, you know? And so I want to give that to the people around me. I want them to have that space where they can be true to themselves without judgment.
And what you just said, that sort of the love me more element, I think is also base need in our kids. And I think they always start there, from the point of view that whatever it is they can share is of value. And it's golden, and it's cool, and it's funny, and it's intriguing, and it's distracting. And sometimes, if we're not there with them in that moment, we miss it. So to be able to honor that, it's the natural state, I think, that a kid expects to be loved more when they share. They expect that that's going to be a positive kind of reach out. And being there for that moment is so important.
But I think that the kids learn that often it's not, and that's what shuts us down. You know, like, I've shared this part of myself, somebody made fun of me, or somebody mocked me, or somebody judged me, and then slowly we develop an armor that doesn't allow us to be our true selves. And as adults, I mean, it's even worse.
You have a quick mention, and it was in one of your pieces, I think it was in one of your pieces around equity, and it was the idea of being, I wrote it as the gift of discomfort as a teacher, and recognizing in moments that you might not know how to help a student or how to work through a problem or even what the next right thing is to say. You've said that you're a safe space, and from my connection to you, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I can see and feel how that would be a part of connecting with you. That challenge of being, sensing our own discomfort. How powerful is that to you in, let's say, working with your colleagues or working with students, as far as measuring? It's too simple to sort of measure it in some ways to say measuring our bias. But how about that self-awareness that you might not actually have the thing that you need to work through what's in front of you? How do you work through that moment?
I think back actually to my very first year of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, that's always a good one.
Yeah. Talk about discomfort.
Yeah, I know. Eh?
Yeah. I was teaching a grade 1 class, and there was this boy, I don't remember his last name, but his first name was Michael, and I could picture him, he's probably 35 now. But oh my goodness, he was so intelligent. And I remember we were doing this lesson. This is before the curriculum existed. That's how far back we're going. So we were talking about dinosaurs, which, in grade 1, you always did dinosaurs, probably in grade 2 and 3 and 4 also. But so we were talking about it, and I said something about an archaeologist, and he corrected me. He said, it's a paleontologist. The kid was 6 years old. And there was another time when we were talking about animals, and he said mountain lions, and I said, there's no lions in Canada. He said, yes, there are mountain lions. And there was no internet either, right? So you had to go down to the library and look these things up.
Yep.
And I guess he just used to make me laugh. I grew up in a family, honestly. I'm one of 5 kids, and my siblings are so intelligent. I was always the dumb one in the family, or felt that way. And so I was used to being outsmarted by people around me and having to find a way to navigate it, and I can't even say having humility, I think, because that presupposes that you actually have some intelligence and you're humble about it. Mm-hmm. But it was more this idea of self-deprecation gets me out of any situation. I know that I suck. I think that when the kids outsmart me, even when they're 6 years old, I was able to say, wow, thanks for that, instead of getting defensive. And I think that when you're in a space of defensiveness and protecting your own self-worth, you're in the wrong space as an educator. That you have to always be in that space of, I did not know that. Thank you for telling me that. And, in terms of equity, and this is something I'm struggling with lately, the idea that, I couldn't have entered into education without becoming aware of the inequities that existed within that space. So as a first-year teacher, I was actually a third-year teacher, I was taking the AQ course for Special Education Part 1. Mm-hmm. And one of the projects was to do, some research and interview somebody in your board. And my research project was, why are all the black boys in the special ed room? Mm. And I interviewed this special ed consultant in the North York board, and she was very defensive about it. She said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, I'm 23 years old and I can see what's going on in there. Are you kidding me? So I just think if you can't see it, then you're choosing not to see it. Mm-hmm. And so as a white woman, it is incumbent upon me to disrupt those spaces, and we talk about, a few years back, our board was really keen on this whole idea of cultural proficiency. And one of the messages that I liked about that was that we are never culturally proficient, that it is always a trajectory forward to learn more and learn deeper. And now we talk about culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy or leadership. And that's the same idea that, you have to listen and you have to learn, but that it's your responsibility. So in our department, we've been taking a pretty intense equity journey. And me, along with Pam Agua and Nada Aude, have been really leading the work. And, it comes to a point. So I've been doing work on white privilege to help people understand and see it. And they want more and they want more. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, open up Google, do some research. I think it's really important for each educator to own their own path of learning around issues of equity and social justice, privilege, and systemic oppression. I think we must all become aware, or we're not serving the students in our system.
I've had moments, just a bunch of things you sort of threw at me there that are just rattling around. First, I love the being tutored by my students, where they throw down and I was like, and there's something about you sort of fall into the teacher trap and want to challenge just a little too quickly. I have to say about myself, I listen too fast. Mm-hmm. And getting to that slow listening where you soak in so much more in the bigger picture, that it keeps you just physically, if you're actually telling yourself, shut up, Clough, shut up, listen more, and then stay in the moment. That's a good kind of mantra. But the other part is just the net effect of listening slower means that you get more information. Mm-hmm. And I've always been kind of a banter teacher, as in sort of playing with words. And it was always an area of interest for me, that writing and the power of words and the history of words and choice of words and what that means, what that can mean as far as self-empowerment, and what can mean as far as affecting change. I've always believed in that quite wholeheartedly. But I realized in my early years is that I was using it tactically as an offense as opposed to a learning tool, because I was quick to sort of play in those games in a way to. I had a buddy John McKinnon when I was in elementary school, and what I really loved about John was that. So my strongest memory of John was that somehow in grade 8, I beat him. Do you remember is it Participation Canada?
Yes.
You used to get like the bronze, silver,
Maybe you did. That was my nightmare.
You remember? It was, absolutely. But I remember in grade 8, I beat him in the 100-meter dash. Now, this guy was... So we were good friends, and we ran together. We did cross-country and all that kind of stuff. There's no way I should have beat him. He was sort of like going to cross-country and beating... Like, he was sort of like the OFSA guy. Mm-hmm. But we ran together so much, at some point, whether I won. At the time, I didn't question why I won. Afterwards, I wondered if he let me. Mm-hmm. And when I thought about the power of that and what that did for me in my sort of just sense of self and positivity, I didn't care. I had that moment where and I never went back and asked, hey, John, did you let me totally through the run or whatever? Because as I'm looking over at him, do you remember the Olympics with the Canadian runner and the two runners, and I'm dropping his name right now, our guy from Markham running against Usain Bolt, and in the Olympics they looked at each other and they actually had a smiling moment. I was like, hey, that was like being John, and then somehow I beat him. So I bring this forward and I think to myself, the listening too fast. In the past, I would have been John just, running down the competition. And I think there is something in the first couple years where you're looking for wins. Mm-hmm. Like you're looking to sort of be in control of your craft. And I love that idea of moving slower and listening more and honoring what is actually brought to you by the student, because I think it benefits everyone. Mm-hmm. So much more. Can we talk about being creative for a little bit?
Sure.
And then we're almost there.
Okay.
I feel like I'm going to end up sending you my little sort of sketch notey
cool.
thing, so you get to see some of my scribbles. But I have you create art, Nice and simple. That's the t-shirt. That's why maybe I'll make some t-shirts like that. You create art. And you have, I'm curious. I was talking with someone last night about the creative process, and this individual I was talking to, he's a storyteller. He does audio, like he does some podcasting, but he also will do some videography, and he loves to put together those narratives in multimedia. And we got on the concept is within the creative process, what part what part is most fragile? What part for him was most fragile in that, where it could go either way? And for him, it was all about that last moment just before finishing. He was talking about a thesis that he completely threw out 2 days before, because it was just at that moment he decided this isn't right, and he rewrote it. So I'm curious, in your creative process, I've seen some of your sketch notes. I've seen your arts that you've posted on your blog. It comes out of you. I always believe that there's some compulsion to get the creative out. What part of it is most fragile, though? Where do you tend most?
Wow. I can't even say that there's a struggle.
That's awesome.
I think it's more about time. It's that for years I didn't do my art. I think the last painting I made was when I was on mat leave with my daughter, who's now like almost 17 years old. Mm-hmm. And life just got so busy that I stopped doing it, and I forgot about it almost. And it reminds me, I'm going to go all literary on you, but there's this Rimbaud poem that I read, and it was like, and I think Shel Silverstein has a similar one, where it's, the idea that as children we see certain things and then it just disappears. It's like fairy dust. And I think that as I moved into my adulthood, particularly as a new parent, that I just forgot. And I was doing my doctoral work then. I mean, I started it before I was a mother, and I finished it when I had 2 kids, 3 jobs later, 2 different houses later. Like, it took me years. And I think that coming into the curriculum department, even though I work in creative departments, because it's so important to be aligned to the board message, there isn't as much room for creativity, which I said with my principal colleagues in the department. I don't know how they feel about it. But for me, it's a less creative space than a school. So as a school principal, there was so much opportunity to be creative. And I think my writing really started there in my weekly memos. That I mentioned Matt Champion. He used to write these. I would do the memo at the school, and he would write a little note, and he would always talk about his kids. And I loved that personal connection, and so I sort of morphed it as my own. And one of the teachers, actually one of them that I went out with yesterday for breakfast at my last school, said to me, your memos are like blogs. You should really write a blog. And I was like, I don't have time for that. And I found that teachers who I left or who left my schools would sometimes email me and say, can you send me your writing, Deb? I need to read one of your pieces. I'm feeling like I need it. I'm craving it. So coming into curriculum, I started first doing my drawing and painting again, and then the writing. And I think it's just, again, it's like my desire to have voice, that I don't feel that I have a lot of voice in my role, because I guess I don't know who's listening. Whereas in a school, you know who's listening. It's like, I think you said on one of your podcasts, of the 2 people listening. And I wrote Jen, I was like, I was listening. Like you don't know when you sort of put it out there. And you see numbers. Like some of my blogs have had like over 2,000 readers, which is so cool for me. But some of them, which are like sometimes my most heartfelt ones, it's like, 70 people read. And then I was listening to Royan's talk, and he said, if I reach that one person, and so I've really tried to learn from that, what he said in your podcast. And so I guess ultimately the hardest part for me is when I put it out there, what's the response? Because the creation of it is just, it's like everything in my mind goes quiet, and it's just this, I used to meditate before I did my art, and now I don't. It's like just putting the pen to paper, I'm in a different state, and I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, I just am with that piece. And I would say it's the exact same with my writing, that I don't even know what's going on around me, because it's like there's a bubble around me. But I put it out there, and there's so many people who've been so kind, just like you can see when I post things, the comments, and especially when I put on Twitter or Facebook and there's like a space for response, or Instagram. Just, I guess the people who believe in the stuff I'm doing and appreciate it have been the impetus for me to keep going. But I don't struggle in the actual creativity process at all.
That's phenomenal. What do you have moments that what type of a moment would remind you to create?
So it's funny. I listened to Elizabeth Gilbert has a book called Big Magic, and she has her creativity podcast, and that was something for me that was really helpful. There was one where she talked about this one writer a poet who, the poem would come to her. Like, she talks about the idea of genius being something that comes to you, but it's not something in you. Mm-hmm. And so this poet would like feel the poem coming at her, and she'd run so she could write it down, and she would literally like pull it backwards for word by word by word. So there are times when I get these ideas, and if I sometimes will put it in my phone, or I'll just send a note to myself, or like a voice note, something so that I remember. But then sometimes when I go back to it, I don't remember what it was. So so it just sort of comes to me like a spark,
I was just working through that in another piece, talking about the Post-it notes by my bedside. Mm-hmm. And those, I think I remember Gilbert talking about that, something about there was not only the sense that a poem was coming, or that the creative was coming. To preface it, what my takeaway from Gilbert's talk was that idea that when the creative, or when the magic, I guess, mm-hmm. comes looking for you, it will spend some time with you, and it'll spend some time trying to get you to notice, but it'll move on.
Right.
But it'll come back again, but that moment will move on. Yeah. And I think I remember that poet you were talking about, and it was not only that there was some whisper that the creative or the poem was coming, but it was also, didn't the poet also have to like run home to mm-hmm. the desk? It yes. felt like the poem was chasing her back to her desk.
Yeah, 100%.
I love that. I love that image, mm-hmm. that it chases us like that, because it really it smacks of, because it what it basically means is that you could be hunted by creativity at any time.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Brene Brown is one of the people I write about often, but she has this quote that says, untapped creativity is not benign, that it will metastasize within us if not expressed, And what does that do to a person when you have all these ideas and you have no space for expression?
That rattles me. And the language, mm-hmm. I get it. I think the language is intentional. Mm-hmm. It takes me to a slightly darker place in creativity. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also a powerful reminder of not to ignore it, mm-hmm. and to check in on yourself more often. You could go down the wellness, or you could just go down the creative. Mm-hmm. Ooh. I got one more question for you.
Okay.
We good?
Yeah.
This has been a phenomenal conversation, by the way.
Thanks.
The whole chasing squirrels thing comes from...
I know the story. I heard it.
Yeah, so grabbing the squirrel off the tree, right? And a few people have put that too. They're like, I've never seen that before. And a few people have... sort of said to themselves, I've played that exact same game, Clough, with a squirrel. You sort of circle one way, it circles the other way. It's that spiraling competition, and then you walk away and the thing runs down and just kind of goes off on its own business. But I exist in, I like the metaphor, I like the story. It sort of reminds me of some of the things that we chase in education, or the mini projects, or the moments that can sometimes be elusive yet so reasonable. Like, my dog grabbed that thing off the tree. I'm like, there's got to be some tactic there that I could do it too. And in the same way my dog didn't know what to do, I wouldn't know what I would do if I ever managed to grab a squirrel off a tree, right? Mm-hmm. So But for where you are right now, what is a moment that you're chasing? Could be a project, could be an activity, could be an idea. What's that thing that's kind of like pulling you into a pursuit mode right now?
Well, that's a funny question. I think that I've gone back and forth in my career of moments like that where I'm striving, and moments where I become sort of, I don't want to say complacent because it's not complacency, it's presence, like just being present and not striving. So I know that for me, as I said, like, when I was finishing my doctorate, and I was so happy at my school as a vice principal, and I did not want to become a principal. My principal would joke around saying, well, I'll retire and you could become principal, and I'll be retired on contract. I'll come back as your vice principal and we'll just work together for the rest of our lives. And that would have been really magical. But I didn't want to leave him. And I came across this expression from Buddha, which was be where you are. Mm-hmm. And it was in a course, and somebody in my course said that she put it as a mantra on her board in her room because she kept thinking back to, when I was with this board, and the people she was currently working with would get really irritated with her, that she would keep talking about the old times, And then I had this obsession with journals and stationery, so I was in the indigo sales section because I try to curb my spending, and I came across this journal with quotes in it, and I flipped through it. And there was the quote. Like, I just opened it up to the page, be where you are. And I thought, okay, I need to stop. And the minute I stop striving is the moment that it comes to me. So I would say the same thing happened to me, with curriculum. Our board didn't have a way for principals to actually work in curriculum. It had to be promoted from within the department. And then with the curriculum review a number of years ago, it opened up. So principals and vice principals have the opportunity to complete a form called their career planning summary. And we can indicate where our goals are going forward. And I clicked off curriculum, and one of the consultants who I used to work with all the time said, Debbie, you really have to come here. Just click it off on your form. And I said, I'm not applying for anything. I said, if Denise Belchez calls me up and says, Deb, we want you in curriculum, I'll go. But other than that, I'm so happy. I just loved my last school. I did not want to leave. I thought we were on a really great trajectory. Then it happened, right? I didn't get a call from Denise, but from Dan, who was my superintendent, said, Deb, we want you to go to curriculum. And I was like, okay. And I didn't know what that meant. And I would say that, there's another role that I have pursued for a number of years, and it has eluded me. And so I think when I get in those situations, I ask myself, is it a message that I'm supposed to be receiving that this is not my path? Or is it my path? I mentioned that it took me a lot of years to become a teacher, even though I knew at 4 years of age that I was supposed to be doing it. So I don't always know what is it. And I feel that I'm at the point now where I just need to go back to that, be where you are. And at the same time, I mentioned I work for the Ontario Principals Council. I'm writing a course for them. I'm teaching a course. I'm doing a workshop in another board on equity. I got invited, which I'm really nervous for, to do an Ignite talk at the Connect conference. Brian Aspinall invited me.
You're going to be awesome.
So I've already written it, and that's where I was talking about being seen and, that whole idea of empathy for the learner and for the people we work with and serve. But so it seems like there's like 8 things I'm working on right now that are outside of my regular work that are just coming to me. So I had made the decision I'm not going to be, searching for that squirrel. I'm just going to be where I am and be content, and then things come to me. So it's a funny pattern that I've seen in my years in education, that the struggle is sometimes you shouldn't actually be struggling when it comes to your own growth. That there's discomfort for sure, but I don't think struggle. I think that things will happen as they're meant to happen. And, the last rejection I received it was hard on me. And so I had to come back to this space of be where I am.
It's awesome. It reminds me in talking with Jill Stambolich, and she was mentioning her year of saying yes. And it's, I mean, that has come across in different blog posts. It's sort of like that idea of being open is not I'm going to do everything. It's more being open. It becomes noticing, and she speaks quite honestly about it. She's got some blog posts where she writes about it, but that idea that just by saying yes doesn't necessarily mean that the stuff's going to work out.
Right.
But the opportunity for reflection and learning also exists there, even in some of the stuff that doesn't turn out. But remaining positive means that you notice the stuff around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
just like the idea that we were discussing around the magic, right?
Yeah.
That it comes tapping on your shoulder, and if it's there, then you respond to it.
I love the moments where I'm tackled by it. I have to be honest. Those moments just of, it's not even necessarily, I'm not talking about because I wasn't paying attention, but like the moment is so sort of like pillowy and aggressive, and it just jumps on you, and you're like, I gotta do this thing, and you sort of like sit up, right? You go grab the tool and you start to make something. I love that. And then I also love the discommunication is in it. Sort of motivated me, and I still don't know exactly where it's going to turn out, but I have to grab that red marker right now and I have to, or something, or the scissors, or the duct tape, and I'm going to make something with duct tape. No joke. My colleague laughs all the time. She says, I look into the room and I see you sort of working with a kid on the English course and then doing some math, and then you'll go and start folding paper into a square, or you water the plant, or you sort of stare out the window for a little bit, and then you go back to teaching again. It's like it might be slightly disruptive, but that's my process. I sort of blend it. Debbie, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter, so it's at Debbie Donsky, and my blog is on Medium, but my goal this summer is to create my own online identity through my own website. So that'll eventually be coming, but it'll be the same. It'll be my name. That's about it.
I love this. This was awesome. This was a really great conversation. I'm humbled that you shared so much of yourself with our talk this morning. It was great.
It's the only way I know how to do it.
And I will expect even more the next time we connect. Like I said, I'm also looking forward to the moment where we can kind of do the handshake or the hug and meet in real life. I'm looking forward to that moment as well.
Can I just say, Chris, like your podcast, it just fascinates me. You're like a chameleon. You kind of morph to each person that you interview, and you match who they are in the way you deliver it and question. So the strength of your podcast is your skill as an interviewer. So I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to say thank you.
Okay.
Little blush. That's awesome. So I look forward to the next time that you and I connect.
Cool.
Absolutely, in real life, coffee's on me. And I wish you the best of the weekend. And once again, thank you for talking with me.
My pleasure.
Chasing Squirrels podcast can be found on iTunes and Podbean. If you want to reach out to me and have a conversation, I can be found on Twitter at Chris J. Clough. I also have a blog on Blogspot of the same name, Chris J. Clough. And some of my postings can be found on Medium, which I think I have under the exact same name. I really appreciate the time that you spent with the podcast this evening. If you ever want to be on the podcast, please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. And I am truly, truly grateful for you sharing your time with me. Take care.